Thanks for joining me. This is Danny, and welcome back to my modded 1.11.2 series. Today we're going to be playing with bees. Hooray! Bees from Forestry, and also a number of other mods. We have Forestry, we have Gendustry, we have More Bees, and we have Magic Bees. So we are going to get really OP with bees in this pack. And unlike the last time, I'm not going to stick with just Forestry for breeding and that sort of stuff. We're going to jump right into Gendustry today, and we're going to go the OP route this time. So I did in the past in my 1.10.2 series. Oh, and we're going to be playing in our new little greenhouse that I just built today. This is going to allow us to have some room to kind of breed bees and set up some of our bee infrastructure, which will have access to the sky, which it will need. Today we are going to cover the basics of Forestry, but then, like I said, we're going to jump right into Gendustry, and we're not going to be playing the waiting game with Forestry. Basically, we're kind of going to skip that part. So to begin with, there's a few basic tools we're going to need. Of course, we're going to need a scoop. This is something that we're going to use to break beehives, because if you break a beehive without a scoop, it'll just break and you won't get anything from it. We've actually already grabbed quite a few of the hive princesses, and then we've also got quite a few drones, a lot of drones. I already had a scoop, and we already have some combs from breaking hives. So right away, we're going to make an apiarist's chest and an apiarist backpack. So if you've seen me play with the Forestry backpacks in the past, the Forestry backpacks basically allow us to automatically pick up certain materials. So we made a mining backpack in the past and a digging backpack in the past, which will automatically pick up our mining resources and our dirt and gravel and cobble and stuff like that. As you might guess, the apiarist's backpack is going to automatically pick up bees, because bees, as you can see, they take up a lot of space. And sometimes they don't stack when they start mutating and stuff like that. So we're definitely going to want both an apiarist chest and an apiarist backpack. So we're going to start out with our chest. Actually, we're going to make two chests. Can we mix and match? We can. Okay, we're going to make two chests, because one of those we're going to need in order to make the backpack. And there we have it. So there's our apiarist backpack. We have 5 pages that we can put bees in. I have my apiarist chest set up. I've got all these bees in here. I'm gonna go grab a few more just so that we can see what that's all about. So I've got this scoop. This is the lowest tier scoop. It has, I think, something like 10 or 15 uses, and we can basically come up to these hives in the world and we can break them and we take some damage because the bees are stinging us. They don't like that we're breaking their hive, and they're going to try to stop us. And as you can see, those bees fell right into my apiarist backpack. So we got a meadows princess and a meadows drone, because that was a meadow hive, because we're in an orchard, which is basically a meadow. Over here, now this looks like, oh, that's a curious. Okay, so this is magic bees. Now the Forestry has a few different types of hives based on biomes. And those, actually, if we look under Princess in JEI, or if we look under Drone, we'll see all the different bees that exist. Now, we're not going to find all these. We're not going to find all these bees in the world. The only ones we're going to find in the world are forest, meadows. Obviously, forest we'll find in the forest, meadows we'll find in the meadows. There's also modest in the desert. There is tropical in the jungle. Those are poisonous. Be careful. And marshy, obviously in the marshlands, wintry, and then end. And we actually already got some end in the last, some ender bees in the last episode. Now this pack also has some other bees, the curious hives. So this is if we want to get into magic bees, which we're actually not going to today. But if we did, we would want to get some of these curious hives, because those are going to get us started with the magical bees. These hives are a completely different thing. This is a beehive from Pam's Harvestcraft. We can just break that with a pick, and it gives us the Pam's Harvestcraft queen bees. That's a completely different thing. It doesn't even do anything with the Forestry bees. We're not going to play with those today, because it's a completely different thing altogether. Okay, so there's another meadows hive. And they will give you damage if you get too close to them too. And I have really good armor, that's why I'm not taking any damage, but you do have to be careful. Like if you're not wearing armor, if you're early game and you come up to one of those beehives, especially if you try to break it, it could possibly kill you. Here's another source of bees, the bee houses that you can find in villages sometimes, in the forestry buildings, which are usually made of different forestry woods that you would have to breed in the world. This is a modest queen, so that is a desert queen. And that is another desert queen. So what's the point of all this? What are we going to do with these bees? We are going to be using these bees to collect some resources. So what bees basically do is you put them in a hive or a apiary or something like that. We'll get into those in a bit. And they're going to basically give us some kind of free resources that we're going to be pulling from those hives. And if you look at the bees, so if we look, for instance, at our princesses again, and we right click on one, we can see what it gives us. So a heroic is going to give us this cocoa comb, which is going to give us, when we put it in a centrifuge, it's going to give us some cocoa beans and beeswax. So we have all these different bees that are going to give us different resources. What I'm interested in is something I have a chart for over here, and I'll kind of explain what all this stuff means. But there are 3 bees that I'm particularly interested in, and they're the ones in bold. One is called a secluded bee. Now I've done this in the past. I may or may not do this one, but this one is going to give us nether quartz. I'm more interested in this. This is really what I want right here. This draconic bee. The draconic bee, as you might guess, is going to give us draconium. I didn't label that, and then we also have the wither bee, which is going to give us little bits that we can use to make nether stars. So as you can see, you can get all kinds of crazy stuff with bees. Now these, by the way, are from the Extra Bees mod. Like pretty much all this stuff over here is from the Extra Bees mod. This stuff is from Forestry. So nether quartz would usually be about the best thing that I would want to get from Forestry, but since we have Extra Bees, we have some other things that we're going to be able to get. Now what this is showing is what bees we're going to have to crossbreed in order to get the bees that we want. So if we look again in JEI, and let's say we look for the draconic bee, we can see that in order to get a draconic bee, we need an ender bee and an austere bee. Now an ender bee is actually a hive bee, and we've already got some. And then we have the austere princess. The austere princess is a frugal bee and a modest bee. And then a frugal bee is either sinister and modest or modest and fiendish. So this can be a little confusing to try to drill through this. So what I did is I made this little chart. I actually did drill through all this stuff, and I made this chart to show us. Oh, it's nighttime. I only have solar panels. I'll be right back. So if we want our draconic bees, we're going to need an austere bee and an ender bee. Now this over here, I've got it on the left column here because this is showing us that this is a hive bee. So this is something that we're going to find in the world, and it happens to be in the end that we're going to find that. So we have an ender princess here, and we probably have some ender drones, and these are pristine, I hope. Oh yeah, they are pristine, which means they last forever. So when we pick up bees in the world, like we just picked up these guys, and we can see that some of the princesses are ignoble stock, some of them are pristine stock. Those queens that we got at the village, they're pristine stock. Ignoble stock means they're not going to last forever. It means they're going to breed for a while, and then they're eventually going to stop. A pristine stock is going to breed forever. So that's usually what we want to find, is the pristine stock. Where were we? Draconic. Trace this back to austere, and then this is actually forestry, vanilla forestry. So the austere bee requires a frugal bee and a modest, and the modest is the one that we get in the desert. The frugal bee is a sinister bee, which we have to breed in the nether. It will not survive in the overworld. Although there is a way around that, and we'll get to that. And then the sinister bee is a modest bee and a cultivated bee. Now the cultivated bee is not a hive bee, but I just put this here because this cultivated bees, every chart is going to have cultivated bees. So I just put it on the end here, and it's a common bee and a hive bee. A common bee is any 2 hive bees. So we can take any 2 different bees that we have here and produce a common bee from them. And then we take a common bee and any hive bee again, and then we get the cultivated. So that's basically how this works. And as you can see, the wither one is further down the line. We have more bees that we have to breed in order to get to wither. That's going to be one of the most expensive ones, actually, with extra bees. And some of these bees can be a little bit difficult to work with now, because they're going to poison us. Some will poison us. Some will cause fires to start. And again, we're going to see how we can kind of pacify our bees so that they don't cause so much trouble for us. So to get started, Forestry provides 3 different ways that we can allow our bees to produce and reproduce. So the first tier is the bee house. Now this is what we found in the village. This is going to be our cheapest stuff. And basically you just put your bees in here. You put a princess. Let's say we want to do a meadows princess and a meadows drone. So this is pristine stock and a regular meadows drone. We can put those in here and they're going to kind of breed, and then this one is going to become a queen. The drone will become part of the colony basically. So now we can see we've got bees flying around here and they're doing stuff. They're producing things. They're cross-pollinating trees. They're pollinating flowers, and we're going to end up with a whole bunch of flowers here. And they also require flowers. So if we didn't have any flowers here, this thing would complain and say, hey, we need some flowers. Now the bee house is extremely slow, and we cannot do any input and output. So obviously this isn't the one that we're going to continue using. However, there is one advantage to the bee house, and that is that we can use ignoble stock in a bee house, and they will last forever. They do not degrade over the generations. That's the advantage of the bee house. We can also craft the bee house. It's pretty cheap. Our second tier is the apiary. So we need some slabs, and then we need an impregnated casing. To get an impregnated casing, we're going to have to play with a carpenter. So we're actually going to want a couple of carpenters. So a carpenter is something that we played with earlier in the series. It's a crafting machine from Forestry that basically takes some fluid and some items, and it produces some output. So in this case, we're going to use this to produce an impregnated casing, and the impregnated casing is going to require some seed oil. To get seed oil, we're going to need a squeezer, which is going to require a sturdy casing, which is just bronze. And all these guys are going to need some RF, so we're going to have to get some RF in these guys. I'm just going to use XNet. I've got XNet over here. We've already got a power source. Got bee particles all over the place. I love these guys. They're so cute. Anyway, so I've got these guys powered up. So we're going to grab some seeds, of course. May as well just fill it up. And we'll just dedicate this squeezer to making seed oil. And it's going to make seed oil. Okay, so now I'm going to use XNet to move the seed oil from the squeezer and into the carpenter. Nice. I have a drawer down here. I'm going to downgrade it so that it only holds a single stack, and then I've got an exporter. I'm going to be exporting seeds right now. We may actually have some other resources exported to here too, but I only wanted to keep one stack in there. So it's just going to fill this up until it has a stack, and then I've got an XNet connector on that, so we can just tell XNet, we'll add a item channel here. We can tell XNet to extract from there and to insert. Actually, because we might have other things in the future, let's just make sure we're filtering seeds in our squeezer. So that should be filling it with seeds. Yay. Okay, so we go into our carpenter, we can set up this recipe, and it's going to load it up here. It says sequoia wood, whatever, it'll dictionary for us. And then we put, so these don't actually exist there, they're just placeholders. We put the inventory in here, and it's going to take it, and it's going to make the impregnated casing. And put it right there. And it's really slow. And there's no way to speed it up. It doesn't have an upgrade slot like this one does. There we go. There's our impregnated casing. Nice. And we could put like a stack of wood in here and it'll make a whole bunch of impregnated casing. And we can make our first apiary. Hooray! So apiary works exactly like the bee house. We put a princess and a drone in there, and we'll get a queen. It'll give us its produce. Actually, we haven't gotten anything from this yet. It'll give us its produce over here, but we also have some upgrade slots, and we can do input-output. So we can hook XNet up to this guy to pull stuff out, to put stuff in, or if you're using Ender.io, you can use Ender.io conduits, whatever. You can use any type of item input, output, hoppers, whatever. This you cannot. To process the output from the bees, we're going to need a centrifuge. We take our combs and drop them in there, and it's going to process them. It's going to spin them, because it's a centrifuge, right? And get the resources out. There we go. We got a honey drop and some beeswax. Nice. And of course, if we look at the bee produce, we'll see that we have a 100% chance of getting beeswax from each honeycomb, and we have a 90% chance of getting a honey drop. Now, these honey drops are going to come in handy because now we're going to want to start analyzing our bees so that we can see what they're all about. The third tier, like bee house, is the alveary. An alveary is a multi-block structure that's pretty difficult to build, and it takes a long time to get all the resources we need, because we actually need to make a 3x3x3 of these blocks that require the scented paneling. It requires like 216 royal jelly and 500 some beeswax and 216 pollen clusters. And to get the royal jelly and pollen clusters, we are going to need these bees, an imperial bee, an industrious bee. Now, we're not going to do this in this series. I did this in another series. It was 2 episodes worth. It was bee crossbreeding. One episode we were crossbreeding the bees to get the imperial bees and the industrious bees, and then I let them go for a really long time, and then the following episode we actually made the alvearies. The advantage of the alveary is that you can heat it up, you can cool it down, so it allows you to breed bees or allow bees to live and produce things in an area that is not their home biome. So if it's too cold for them, you can put a heater in it. If it's too dry, you can put a hydro regulator in it. It expands what you can do with the bees and where you can put them. However, it does have quite a few drawbacks. For one, it does not have slots for frames, so you cannot upgrade it. Although it is faster, the bees do produce faster, even without the upgrades. The other disadvantage, besides the fact that it takes up quite a bit of space, is that it doesn't give you the special drops of the bees, unless you're in that bee's biome. So there is a fourth option that we have in this pack, and it is called the Industrial Apiary. So it's a 1-block thing. It's pretty expensive, and we'll get into all this in a bit, but it does require this bee receptacle. Actually, it isn't all that expensive, but it does require a considerable amount of RF, and it has upgrades that we can add to it. Quite a few upgrades. The same upgrades that we can add to the alveary. Besides having the heater and the cooler, it also has a hell emulation upgrade. We have winter emulation upgrade. And when we emulate the biome, it will allow the bees to produce their special output. So for instance, let's just get rid of this for now. QPJNVQ. This is the URL to this chart. For instance, the secluded bee nether quartz is actually a special output. So the secluded bees won't give you nether quartz unless you have them in their biome that they're supposed to be in, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is a dry biome, like a desert or a mesa. So if we try to use the alveary here and dry it out and heat it up, we're not going to get nether quartz from the secluded bees. However, we don't have to worry about that with these. But if we use the Industrial Apiary and we give it the Desert Emulation Upgrade, which is bronze gear and environmental processor, it'll give us those special outputs. Let's start mutating some bees. Nice. So I've got a forest princess. I actually have a common drone. I'm not sure where I got it. I think I got it from a village or some loot chest or something. So we can already start out making our cultivated bee. Now, if we do it with forestry, and actually if we look under cultivated, and we right click, we can see that a common bee and a forest bee, or any hive bee, tree, marshy, whatever, doesn't matter, will make a cultivated bee 12% of the time. Right? So we can put these guys in here, the forest princess and our common drone, and hope that we get a cultivated drone. And this process, and then we have to wait for it to go through its life cycle like we did with these guys. This process could take hours, many hours, just to get to the cultivated drone, right? And then we'll have to do that again when we want to get our, whatever our next step is. So when we want to do our sinister drone, we have to get a modest, and we have to get our cultivated, and go through that same process to get a sinister drone. So if we right click on cultivated, we can see all the different things that we can get, possibly by crossbreeding with other things. And one of those is the sinister drone. When we cross a cultivated with a modest, that has a 60% chance. So it's a little bit better. However, it's not 100%. So we could end up eating up a lot of drones, and then we'd probably want to have a bunch of apiaries set up so that we can create a bunch more common drones in case we run out while we're waiting, you know, in case we end up with just a bunch of forest drones and princesses and such. So we're going to bypass that whole thing, right? We're going to bypass that because we're going to use Gendustry. We're going to make a mutation. Actually, we're going to end up making an advanced mutation, which is made with the mutation, which is made with all these parts. So this crafting is going to get pretty expensive. I'm not going to go through this whole crafting process with you, but just to give you a sense of what we're doing here, the Gendustry crafting recipes are actually kind of fun because the parts actually tell you what the thing has. So it's got 3 bee receptacles because it actually holds 3 bees. It has a power module because, you know, it holds power. It has a genetics processor. Now the genetics processor does some kind of processing of genetics, right? It warps it messes with the genetics of our bees. So every machine that does anything having to do with genetics is going to have a genetic processor. So you can kind of look at the crafting recipe and get a sense of, oh, that's what this machine is going to do. It's going to mess with our genetics. And then it has a mutagen tank, which tells us something, right? It tells us that this thing needs mutagen. It's going to hold some mutagen. So in addition to making our mutatron, we're also going to have to make a mutagen producer, which also has a mutagen tank, a couple of power modules, and this guy is what we're going to use to make mutagen. Okay, there's our mutagen producer. Much bronze later. I'm going to put this, I'll just put it way over here. So there are several materials we can use to make mutagen. This thing does pull a lot of power, 5 million RF it stores, so it's going to be a bit of a drain on our power network for a little bit. This whole, actually, Gendustry does require a lot of power in general, so make sure you have a good source of power before you start getting too deep into Gendustry. If we put a piece of redstone in here, it's going to very, very slowly get some mutagen out of it. Yeah, 100 millibuckets. So it takes 10 redstone to do a bucket of mutagen. Now if we do yellorium, it gives us a full bucket. So we can fill up this entire tank with just 10. Mutatron works similar to the apiary, where it has a slot for our bees. We're going to put a princess and a drone in here, and it's going to mutate it every single time. However, there's one limitation with the mutatron, and that is that if there's more than one possibility, for instance, the cultivated and eldritch could give us an esoteric bee, or it could give us a charmed bee. If we put it in here, we're definitely going to get one of those two, but we don't know which one. That's where we want the advanced mutatron. Here's the advanced mutatron. So it's basically the same idea, except we now have the ability to select. So if we put a set of bees in here that has more than one option, we'll see the options down here, and we'll be able to click the one that we want. Now this thing does require labware. Labware is another kind of expensive thing. That is genetics labware. It's just a diamond and a couple of glass panes is going to get us 16 genetic labware. We're going to consume one of those for every mutation that we do, and we just put those up there. I've got this automatically being filled to 16 labware, and I've got a stack of it coming out of our system down here. So that's genetics labware that's being exported from here, and I have a crafting upgrade. So we're auto crafting genetics labware, and then I have XNet inserting 16 genetics labware. So it's always going to keep 16 in there. So now we can start doing our mutations. So our forest princess and our common drone gives us just one option, and that is the cultivated queen. So we'll click that. It will go through this process and give us a cultivated queen. And this is a purebred cultivated queen. So before we go much further, let's make ourselves an analyzer. I'm not sure why I haven't done this yet. That is made like so in our carpenter with 2 buckets of water. And we'll put all the ingredients in there. And it is now making it. It's pulling some RF. Oh, that's what's making all that noise. Poisonous. Oh boy. Why it is poison me? They're only supposed to do that at night. Huh, weird. That's from Evilcraft. Got some poison sacks. So the portable analyzer is what we're going to use to analyze things, including bees. And it'll tell us all the traits that the bees have. But in order to analyze a bee, we have to pacify it with some honey. Otherwise, you know, it's not going to sit still long enough for us to analyze it. So we open up our portable analyzer, and we can see our portable genetics analyzer. There's nothing to analyze. We have to put something in there, right? So we can use this to analyze bees. We can also use it to analyze saplings from trees, from forestry trees, and butterflies as well. But of course, we're going to use this for bees today. So if we put this guy in here, it consumes a honey drop, and then it gives us information about this bee. So we have a cultivated queen. Now this is the default cultivated queen because Gendustry, when you use Advanced Mutatron, will always give you a purebred whatever it is. So in this case, we have a purebred cultivated queen, meaning that all of the traits are the same. All the active traits and inactive traits are exactly the same. So similar to real life genetics, each bee has 2 sets of traits. Theoretically, one from a mother, one from the father is how that would normally happen. However, in this case, it's showing us the active traits on the left. So these are the traits that that currently dictate how the bee behaves. And then inactive traits on the right, which do not dictate how the bee behaves, but they are traits that can be passed on to offspring. We see we have the shortest lifespan, so this one doesn't live very long. It has fast production. It has slow pollination. The flower type is flowers, so there has to be flowers near the apiary. Different types of bees have different flowers that they require. Like for instance, the sinister bee requires nether flowers, so like netherwort, I believe, is what that one requires. But they all have something different. Some of them have weird things like rocks or dragon eggs and crazy stuff like that. And then fertility, this means that it's going to produce 2 offspring, 2 drones, and a princess after it goes through its life cycle. Average territory, that's how long or how large of an area that it covers. So that's going to affect 2 things. One, it's going to affect how far it's going to look for flowers. It's also going to affect trees that it pollinates, and it has no effect. So some bees have good effects, some bees have bad effects, like poison, wither even. This one has no effects whatsoever. And then some of them even have good effects like regen and stuff like that. So then tab 2 gives us information about the environment. So this guy has a normal climate. It has 0 tolerance. It has to be in a normal climate, so it can't be in like a cold or a hot climate. Humidity is also normal. It has 0 tolerance going either way from normal humidity. So a wet climate or a dry climate, it will not survive in. Well, it won't produce in. Diurnal means daytime, so it produces during the day. Nocturnal, nighttime. It does not produce at night. It is not a tolerant flyer, which means that if it rains, it will not produce. It can't fly in the rain. And cave dwelling, no, which means that it needs an open sky. So if it were cave dwelling, then we wouldn't have to have an open sky. In fact, I think we would have to have a closed sky. So now we actually have to put this guy, we have to get this guy out of here. Oh, wait, produce. Oh, and then this tells us what it produces. So the possible produce is a honeycomb for the cultivated queen. So nothing special, just a regular old honeycomb. And then the possible specialty, this is what it will produce if it's in the right environment. So this one doesn't have any specialties. And then this tells us about possible mutations. We haven't learned about any of the mutations yet. So, and then this tells us the classification. It's a fast-working bee, thinks anything but opera is beneath it. So we're going to put this guy in here, and we can see that it is happy in this environment. This guy's going to go through its life cycle because we need now to move on to our next step, because we're focusing on Draconic right now. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. To get to the next step, we're going to have to get to austere. We already have ender, so austere, and then from that, or for that, we need frugal and modest. We already have modest, and for frugal we need sinister, which is modest and cultivated. So we're going to need a cultivated, either a cultivated drone or a cultivated princess. We cannot use the queen, so that's why we have to put it in the apiary and we have to let it go through its life cycle, and then we can use it to mutate into our next bees. So in the meantime, I'm going to grab a modest. Now I actually put an external storage on this apiarist chest. As nice as the apiarist chests are for getting extra information, they're not the greatest for searching because you have to hover over everything. So this way I can just go into my refined storage system and look for modest. And let's see, we have a pristine princess, our modest princess, and our cultivated drone, and we can now make a sinister queen. Hooray! Now the sinister queen is going to be a little bit tough to work with, as we will soon see. Oh, and by the way, I have this thing automatically pulling redstone now. Even though the yellorium can get us a lot more stuff and faster, we don't have as much yellorium, so I'm just going to have it do redstone. We don't need it that quickly anyway right now. Okay, so there's our sinister queen. Now let's analyze her. So she has a normal lifespan. Her production is slower. Pollination is average. Flower type is nether, so she's going to need some netherwort. Fertility 2, territory average, effect aggression. Climate hellish, the nether climate. Humidity is arid. This is diurnal and nocturnal. It is not a tolerant flyer and not cave dwelling. And it produces simmering combs. So if we try to put this in here, it's too humid, no flowers, and it's too cold. So either we can move our apiary to the nether, or we can start getting into our industrial apiaries. So in the next episode, we are going to be playing with industrial apiaries and all the fun upgrades that we could give them. And then we're also going to be doing some genetic modifications so that we can make our bees more productive and remove some of the nastier traits and get them to do exactly what we want. So by the end of the next episode, we are going to have a high productivity Draconic bee. Woohoo! So I do hope you join me for that. If you do have any questions, comments, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And of course, if you did enjoy this, don't forget to click the like button and to join me next time. Thanks for watching.